put on YouTube and some little child show, and literally her eyes just opened up, and then she was just locked in like crazy. And we're like, this is drugs. She's a
Yeah.
zombie. Just seeing that was crazy. We do know that the research, if you put it in ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, like it's going to tell you increase ADD, decreased ability to focus, decrease like creativity.
How is that 6-year-old being taught? Like, are they always wanting to be stimulated?
Mhm.
And I can't help but think, man, this is not going to end well. Like, we might turn 6-year-olds into gamblers when they're
Mhm.
18 because of that constant need for stimulation or a reward. And yeah, I just don't think it ends well. Joel Smith, welcome to the Strong Female Athlete Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Erica. I was excited that you asked me back on this just my past week or two or whatever, and it was great talking last time. So it's great to be here again.
Absolutely. And we were texting back and forth about phone usage in
Yeah.
young athletes today and just kind of the different rules parents have around phone usage or lack thereof. And
Hmm.
I think it's really important to have this discussion because there can be some severe consequences for our kids in sport performance, being able to express creativity, being able to connect with their friends and teammates. And I haven't had anyone on the podcast yet to discuss how severe this is for
Hmm.
kids being on their phones so much, especially really young during those developmental years. So maybe you can just start off with just your journey with your kids, and
Hmm.
you're also a performance coach. For those who don't know Joel, he is incredible at what he does, but he's in this space, he's in the performance space, but he also has his own young athletes. And yeah, I'm just really curious your journey with phone usage and your own children.
Sure. Yeah. So my kids are 1, 6, and 8, and I don't plan on. Sometimes, my older one, she's like, "Oh, so and so has a smartphone. When do I get one?" That doesn't get asked that often. But usually I'm like, it's when you're 16, it's going to be a flip phone or something. I will say I like Jonathan Haidt's work, and say, there's, if people aren't familiar with him, kind of talking about the trends in mental health and all that stuff from 2010, introduction of smartphones up to the current day. And there's a growing contingent of, the word is a Luddite, like people who rejected technology, but like these kids who are in college now and have had a flip phone for extended time, like there's people who are starting to see that. And so, I'll tell them my goal, the hope is that by the time they get to high school, that is more common or whatever it is. Although I do think that, it's kind of funny. People talk about phones now, and if this is 50 years from now, people are going to look at people sitting with this thing in their hand and laugh, because at that point it'll probably be something in your eye, or like they'll be like, oh, what stupid clunky thing people carried around and had in their hand, how dumb was that? And now we just have like some implant or something. So it's but it's like there's always going to be a counter culture, rightfully so, to some of these shifts. And so, yeah, with them, the big thing, since they're not even close to that yet, it's just screens and blue light screens specifically, just because blue light, you're going to get people say it's horrible for you, it's the end of the world. You're going to get people who don't say anything, which is honestly, most people don't even think about it. But blue light it is different than the screens that we had growing up. And so it's worth noting that, because a tablet or a flat screen LCD TV is going to have it's going to be a little bit more impactful on a child's brain. And so that's something I definitely consider. But just in terms of their own, just growing up, limiting screen time, I think is always a big thing, and understanding that, as well as time outside. So to me, it's kind of a two-headed thing. It's like, one, limit screens, and then two, get outside. There's I've spent some time with Rafe Kelly, who is the founder of Evolve Move Play. He was on Jordan Peterson's podcast a while back on just the need for specifically boys to roughhouse, but all children really. We all need physical. Even my 1-year-old daughter, if I'm wrestling with my son, she like toddles over and jumps on us. It's wired in us to roughhouse or just have physical contact, even if it's my 8-year-old loves like jumping on me, my daughter. So it's wired in all of us, boys obviously more, but that's important for everybody. And one of the big things with Rafe and his group, and so one of his assistant coaches, Kyle, coach, had said like we need to be outside for X amount of hours a day. Now in the summer it's like 8. We should be outside like 6 to 8 hours a day in the summer. In the winter we should still be. I know it's different down there in Florida with you, Erica, but like we should still be outside at least a couple hours a day, which sounds crazy because it's like, well, if it's 20 in January, it's like, well, the kids don't have a reason to be outside per se, but if it's snowing out, then they'll go play because they're excited about it. So no matter what, I still try to say, hey, at least, even if it's worst case scenario, 10 minutes, just go outside and put your coat on for 10 minutes, even if there's no snow on the ground, just because that's so essential. And it's also the birth of creativity. And then on the other side, it's limiting screens. So for us, me and my wife have on the school year, we have no screens on the weekdays, and then the kids get that on weekends. And I appreciate my wife for doing this. Actually, she usually wants the kids to watch a movie on the when they do get screens on weekends. It's usually a movie because a lot of shows, it's a very bingey thing. It's like just binge, 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 show, and kids get so used to just like click on, click off. I'm gonna watch this. Me and you had to suffer through commercials when we were growing up. But I mean, like, it was like, you're going to do this show. You just have to be patient. This is, again, I think there's nice to have choice, but I appreciate that my wife made that decision because within every movie too, you kind of have a story, you have some level of character development, hopefully, unless it's like the Paw Patrol movie. And I'm just like, and it's like, nothing, but they at least are getting like some level of story and character development as well. So usually it's no screens and no tablets either for the most part. My parents got a little smartwatch for my daughter who's 8, and I was just like, oh, and so she'll get a little bit of that. I try not to come down so hard because then like as soon as they get a chance later, right, they could just go nuts with it. So you can't be so hard with that stuff. But just from a general rule, it's usually that with no screens on weekdays, movies on weekends, some shows if they want them, and then get outside as much as possible. And hopefully that spurs free play in that balance.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure the parents listening have a lot of questions. But my first question that I think they might be able to relate to is so you do no screens Monday through Friday, and then you let them like watch a movie or whatever, and then back to Monday, no screens. Do they throw tantrums? Because I've heard when parents take the device away, their child goes absolutely
Yeah.
bonkers. Or was it because you introduced this early on that you've avoided the tantrums altogether and it's just kind of part of the lifestyle now? Is that how that works?
Yeah, I'm not immune to tantrums. I mean, and I find, but it's when they get it every day that and I don't know the exact stats with habits and addictions and all these things, but it's funny to sometimes you take a step back and you look at TV and candy. Like these are basically like candy to kids is kind of like alcohol or stuff, drugs to adults in some ways because it's like, ooh, like this thing that just lights up all your neurotransmitters, right? And we let our kids have occasionally, it's like Halloween. They'll go get a massive bag and we'll take like 3/4 of it out. You can still get your 20 pieces or whatever, but like so we don't, and we're not like in the crazy with it, but you just realize like these things become drugs to kids because if they get something every day, if it is a habit and it elicits this response in the brain, you're gonna get that addictive behavior that then results in that. But I find, and my wife and I have found that when it's cold turkey, you don't get this. It actually becomes a non-issue, funny enough. Like, because if you get enough days in a row and they know it, they don't ask. They know they're not getting it, so they don't ask. Like, it's just not on the table. It's like if it's not on the table, I find for them it's totally fine. It's more the weekend. Like if it's like so they get a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and if it's like Sunday and they've gotten 2 days of it, then they might start to get a little cranky on that Sunday because they've had that exposure. But then it's Monday and we're rolling into the next week and then we're fine. So
Mhm.
yeah, it is interesting because and certainly this is not what we've always done. We have allowed them an hour a day throughout the week or so, and that does they aren't happy when they turn it off, and so there is that. And I just think too, things like fasting or anything in life, we have so much of everything all the time. So I think having like You have it, and then you don't have it. You have it, you don't have it. Like these are natural cycles too. And I think that's also helpful to, introduce this role where we literally have everything, like all the time. It's a crazy state of existence that I don't think has ever existed in humanity before.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that you kind of relate this to, like, candy, drugs, addictions, and it lights up the same neurotransmitters, and I think a lot of parents, they feel like if they don't give their kid a smartphone, that they're going to feel left out from their
Mhm.
friend group. But it's like when we were all in middle school, high school, it's like if you're not drinking and partying with the cool kids, yeah, you're gonna feel left out, but doesn't
Mhm.
mean it's good for you. So
Yeah.
you kinda have to be okay with sticking out like a sore thumb. And I know you had mentioned to me that you're kind of the oddball with some of the parent groups you're in because
Mhm.
of these smartphone rules you have. And how have you kind of navigated that? Because I think there's a lot of FOMO or like feeling left out in this day and
Yeah.
age.
Yeah. So what I found, this is just like with my neighborhood, for example, is, and this I think fits with the Jonathan Haidt, like basically when we've learned definitively this is bad for you, is I find the parents, at least this is a small, maybe a cohort of maybe four parent groups, is they don't want their kids having smartphones either until, however long. Now it'll be interesting to see how long they hold out for. I think that's the question. And I think the difference is that, and not to say, look, like we all have our own ways or methods. I think relatively my kids probably get the lowest screen time. So I think there's something to not just looking at it as just one thing. Oh, it's only the phone. So it's also everything. It's how often are you in front of a tablet, and how often are you, again, just because, yes, there's a lot of negative social, once you get to social media and all that, yeah, there's huge negative pieces there, but it's also just the addiction and the loops in your brain of constantly having to look at that thing. So yeah, I found though that the parents who have younger kids, they're very aware and they get it. And so, it'll be interesting. And I also do think that by the time this cohort of 5 to 8 to maybe 10-year-olds is in high school, I am curious if it'll still be a smartphone, or if there will be some advancing technology that kind of supersedes that in a way. So but yeah, that's probably, it's interesting to see that the older parents, I think, like, a lot of their kids have the phone because it just was the thing, and more to a greater degree, and they talk about a lot about how, obviously their kids are very screen addicted and all that type of thing, as we all know. So yeah, it's just a little bit different by age and cohort, and I think we're starting to learn from the past, but the question is just simply, what do we do about it?
Mhm. No, it's interesting when sports parents or adults talk about how kids these days, they're always on their phones. But when you look around, sometimes the adults are
Yep.
using their
Oh yeah.
phones more than the kids. And I'm just really curious, like, what's your own journey with your device? And how are you aware and setting the example for your children? Because the kids will model any behavior. And I think adults need to really take responsibility too.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And in a sense too, like, I'll come on this podcast. So they're like, yeah, I do this, this, and this. That's my lowest hanging fruit, in the sense that a lot of it is sometimes work related, which sucks. Like I hate that, in so many ways, you know, like my work is internet based. And so it's like, and I know so much of what you do is as well. So it's like, I think to be able to take that and then put it away. I have had times in my life where I would put my phone away at 6, and then I wouldn't pick it up again till 8:30 the next day, or 9. And sometimes I wonder how I did that. Like, it's just, I've had these spurts of just being so good with that. But I do think about that a lot, Erica, is with my kids, because it is funny. Even the baby, she's 14 months. That's the thing she wants. She wants, if I put the phone up on the top of the couch, she'll climb up to the top of the couch. That's the thing she wants the most. She's like, ooh, that looks interesting. It's just so, but I mean, to kids though, it's like, this is magic, right? Because could you imagine? We're so used to these devices now, but if this was 30 years ago, you would see that and be like, this is like an alien artifact. Like, look at this amazing. It's unbelievable how this. I think we take it for granted how amazing, like, all technology is to children. So yeah, that's the thing that I actually struggle with. I mean, I'm not like horrible, but I'll look at it at I'll go see how did my Instagram post do at 7:30 or something, and then after dinner's done, I keep it away definitively at the table. Anything that's like dinner or anything like that, I'm very protective about those times. I think that's essential because that's like the worst if you're bringing it into that. But that's something that I'm certainly still working on. But I agree. You go to like games, and I'm coaching three sports this spring: youth soccer, youth flag football, and track and field on the high school level. And it is amazing. You go to those youth soccer games or practices, especially, really practices. And that's what the parents do while they're waiting, really. And, in some sense, maybe if it was 30 years ago, maybe a few of them would have a book or something, like maybe they'd be talking to each other more. I don't really know. But it's just, it is everywhere. And yeah, there's that mirroring behavior. And it's kind of interesting to think if the kid, you put yourself in the child's perspective and they're not allowed to get this, but the parent's always on it, then they're like, well, I can't wait till my time comes and then I'm going to be there too. So yeah, I agree with that. That's something I'm still working on because I do know there will be that inflection point where there'll be that mirroring behavior. And it is also my laptop because I work from home and like I'm always on the computer for work. So I'm just like, do they think this is what life is? I hope not. It's that's the thing I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that it also is really hard for adults, and we have developed brains. And
Hmm.
just imagine what it's like for really young kids who are still developing and trying to navigate all this. And like your baby, she sees the flashing lights and the cool colors. And
Hmm.
yeah, I get why kids are so drawn to it. But I think adults really need to be intentional with like when the phones are out. I really like your tip about just not having them at dinner. And when I go out with my husband, I leave the phone in the car
Yeah.
because when it's there on the table, even though you're not on it, you still like your heart rate goes up. There's some
Hmm.
response in
Oh
your
yeah.
body where you're like, is someone messaging me? And the notifications are popping if they're on. And it's just a lot. And I think that's a really good tip to just not have it in sight in certain situations.
Yeah. It's easier for me when like I find too, it's just interesting to be aware of your own stress barometer. Like Sundays, I usually, sadly, I mentioned this before we push record, but have a few programs still to write for clients. But a lot of times on Sunday, we'll go to my wife's family's house, and I usually almost always will leave my phone in the car intentionally, and that's actually glorious. It's like, oh, it's so good I get to leave all this behind, and just have family time. And so I think, for me, a lot of it is stress conditioning due to work, and so yeah, just trying to find that space and awareness to break from that. And to me, it's so good to be able to because I'm like, I've been working through this the last week. The last thing I want to do is look at my phone for another, 3 hours here at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what are your thoughts on like 6-year-olds? I see this a lot when I go out to restaurants. There will be a whole family at a table, and their 6-year-old is on an iPad. It's so loud. I can hear the games they're
Mhm.
playing. It's really annoying when you're out in public. But I'm just more worried about how is that 6-year-old being taught? Like, are they always wanting to be stimulated?
Mhm.
And I can't help but think, man, this is not going to end well. Like, we might turn 6-year-olds into gamblers when they're 18
Mhm.
because of that constant need for stimulation or a reward. And yeah, I just don't think it ends well.
No, and I think that's the big one too, is like for the parent to understand, well, why should my kid not be on this? And it is, I think it kind of goes with that where this is the first time in history where we get everything at our fingertips for comfort. And that includes giving things to kids to, sedate them basically so we can do whatever. It used to be you had to figure out things as a parent you had to be more creative to figure out ways to keep your kids interested in various things.
Coloring
Um
books. They had coloring books at restaurants back in the day.
yeah,
You
oh yeah,
remember that?
exactly.
Or you go to
Yes.
like Lone Star or Outback and the table was like paper and they brought
Yeah.
crayons.
Yeah, we
That's
still
a
do that.
throwback.
There's still places. We'll ask sometimes. Oh yeah. And
Yeah.
the kids love that stuff. Like they love it as
Yeah.
much as any device, to be honest. Especially once you remove them from some of those things for a while. It's interesting watching like my 1-year old too. Like you see the things that light the child up. Like she loves music. You turn music on and she kind of like bounces up and down. I have a little guitar I bought for my older daughter, but my 1-year old wants to learn to play it. Like so this is like we're so wired to love just natural innate things in our environment that are not electronics related. And I think it's so easy to forget that. And it does take some effort to find the thing that engages the child fully, but it's not that much. And it's just something where we've just, I tell you, my daughter, my oldest, the first time we held out showing her any videos, and I remember she was about, let's see, probably about 16 months maybe. And we were at a restaurant. We were in Hawaii with the women's swim team at Cal. So we had gotten invited and all this. And like, we're at this late banquet and my daughter's going nuts. And my wife and I were like, well, we got to. There's no other choice. So we put on YouTube and some little child show, and literally her eyes just opened up, and then she was just locked in like crazy. And we're like, this is drugs. She's a
Yeah.
zombie. Like, and so it's like that. Just seeing that was crazy. I mean, and you think, and again, yeah, like the effects on the brain. I'm not an expert with every bit of research, but we do know that the research, if you put it in ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, like it's going to tell you increase ADD, decreased ability to focus, decrease like creativity. Although I will say kids, I think, can be very creative in the space of, if you're making, cool posts or whatever. I do see a decent amount of creativity. It's not to say it doesn't exist, but to be able to be more creative multilaterally with everyday things, I do think it hurts. And there's also like stillness is a big one. And this even goes into coaching. And I'm a big believer in taking time that is still. And, if you're talking about physical preparation, training, time where there's no movement and isometrics for an extended period of time, or anything that involves this stillness and processing is also like, even before phones existed, I think that was a missing thing that really doesn't get put in the system very much. And so we're also depriving people of that and the ability to sit through things. So there's a lot of really negative pieces. And I think I saw that firsthand. So when I was at Rafe Kelly, he has a retreat in Washington State. It's like out in the mountain for a week, and there's no reception there. There's no internet, no phone reception. And I had to do all my work ahead of time. This was like the most monumental thing. I did all my work advanced for a week, and I was up there, and like my brain, I could feel it changing. Like I could feel myself getting better intuition and better insights, and like being in nature. And towards the end of that whole thing, I was like, wow, this must be some level of what, like, you look at like how like Native Americans were, intuitive and figured out how to, basically insightfully adapt to their environment. And I'm like, I'm starting to understand a little bit more about how and why they could do this, because sometimes you don't know how your brain can really work until you remove yourself from the typical, our typical landscape. And it's funny because ever since that experience, I haven't been able to take a week off. I wish I could, so it's like, I really want to go back to that place. I think sometimes I get it when, like, I wake up in the morning and the birds are out, and I don't, I'm just kind of like lying in bed or something, right? Like those low brain waves. But sometimes I think we've forgotten just how insightful and intuitive and creative our brains can be, because we're always in a place where that's kind of choked out of us to some degree or another, and so it's I think we've forgotten. And you think, how far will we get into the future where we've actually forgotten who we are, because we're living in this place that's just crazy now. So, not to be a total, like, as I mentioned, like a Luddite who's like none of it, but I do think we need to go there. We need to like withhold enough to find that so we can see it, and we can try to return to it as much as we can and give the same experience to our children.
Let's maybe talk about more how this all impacts sport performance. And I
Sure.
really like what you said, that kids, they can be creative on a smartphone through a post or going on Canva and designing something.
Hmm.
I'm all for that. But multilaterally, like you said, they need to learn how to maybe do coloring books or
Yes.
manipulate different objects, because sport is
Hmm.
spontaneous. They're going to be entering a multitude of environments. So they have to do that within their everyday life and not be so one dimensional on the screen. So maybe we can expand on that a
Hmm.
little bit more to building the best athletes we can.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So I'll start with, I guess, just straight away, the practical piece where the rubber meets the road in my own coaching, and this is with high school, because obviously I don't have 8-year-olds or 6-year-olds on sitting on smartphones before they jump into practice, not yet, thankfully. But I do have high schoolers who, a lot of them, before practice, they're on their phone, which I'm like, look, there's only so much I can control here. But the thing I definitively will share with them, and honestly, this made a big difference. Like, I was really surprised by how quickly they took this on. Was I saw Steve Magnus had a post, who's, for people who don't know him, just well-known running coach. And he's written a couple books and high performance type books. And there's research that it came out. I wish I knew the author, but basically it was saying if you're on a smartphone, it decreases your ability to learn skills. I believe not just things in the classroom, but physical skills. So there's this, it's a negative interference effect. And I think it was within 5 minutes of practice starting to 5 minutes of practice ending. Basically, the if you are on your phone, go practice, and then as soon as you're done, you're on your phone again. That actually limits the brain's ability to prepare and then absorb what was learned. And so, not to mention, so I had noticed this for a while. We'll go through a warm up or whatever, and I'll say, hey, all right, everyone go ahead and get some water. People go get their water, and they're checking. I don't even know what they're checking on their phone. They get their phone out, and they're checking something. Now, sometimes this is the one time in 20 that I mess up with it is some kid had it's like a ride they're trying to get or something after practice. I'm like, okay, um, but I like, hey, my rule is there's no phones at practice, which should be obvious. I mean, but track is a little different, right? Because you get like breaks that's there, but it shouldn't be. But for a year that went by, I think I just it didn't happen often enough that it bothered me. And then there was one practice and I'd seen that from Steve that I was just like, I can't believe I'm letting this happen. This is crazy, So I just told him about the learning piece and the 5 minute window. And honestly, ever since I said that, not only has people not checked it, and I just had to say it once. I mean, I think because kids want to be good. Like if they know something's bad for them and they can reasonably control it, especially because they're in practice and it's fun anyways and their friends are around and they want to get better, they can do it. And so ever since I said that, for the most part, no one checks their phone during practice, of course, but even before and after, I don't see that quickness either to hop back on a smartphone. So I guess whatever I said, however was communicated well enough for that point to get across. But the cool thing you could think of too, well, what if that 5 minutes could turn into 15 on either side of it, as well? Like, what if that could get expanded out? And I think that's where that stillness goes in. There's also some research or some methods on after practice, even taking some time for stillness. It could be a journal, recording your thoughts and your process, and then you almost rewinding practice in your head, and that helps the absorbing process of things. So yeah, that's directly what I do in practice is, obviously no phones during practice, but also trying to have that buffer zone. And when kids are aware of it, I think it's good for them. So I have some other thoughts too, but I don't want to go too long, but just if you have any follow up with that, I'm happy to chat about it.
I think that's such a great point that just the moment when you explained it to them, it caught on and it stuck. And I think too often adults will nag and just be like, "Well, phones are bad," and there's
Yeah.
no explanation. And
Hmm.
teenagers or young kids, they appreciate the explanation, and then sometimes they do change the behavior just because of that. And I think that's really great. And I actually had to do something similar because during our lifts, we use Team Builder. I
Oh yeah.
use it to dock everyone's program because everyone's on a different program. And so they kind of have to look at their
Yeah.
phones for Team Builder. But what happened was all their notifications kept going off.
Oh
Everyone was
man.
getting Snapchats every minute. And then while they were
Oh
checking
man.
their sets and reps, they were looking behind my back at their Instagram, and I'm like, "I can't have this anymore."
Hmm.
So, I made this box that says phones on it, and I tell them, "Okay, check what your next exercise is, how many sets and reps you have, and then leave it back in the box, and you're gonna stand on the floor until that set and rep is over."
Yeah.
And it forced them during rest times to actually rest and be still, but
Yeah.
also to talk to each other and
Yeah.
socialize. And I'm sure you're the same within like the private sector, but a lot of the athletes you work with, they come from different clubs, different schools, and like I want them to become friends. And the only way for that to happen is if we get off the phones during rest time and you guys actually get to know one another. So
Hmm.
since we've done that, it's been really beneficial because it was just stressing me out just seeing how many
Yeah.
notifications they were getting.
Yeah. I would probably be stressed out too. I mean, I turn the notifications off on my phone, which is funny because people will call me and like nothing goes, like literally nothing goes off. If I couldn't take it if I'm hearing dings and stuff. But so it's like I would probably be stressed out just knowing how many times somebody's phone is dinging or something like that. So yeah, it's a tough balance too with the weight room, because I remember when that was first happening. When I was at Cal, Bridge Athletic is a big player in that space, and I think Mike Boyle's gym had a hard no phones in the gym thing, and then people are like, well, no, phones are part of the culture now, and it's like it's a tough balance because the ultimate would be, I guess, maybe there's like, and again, like logistics is tough with it, but like I know at Cal we had like a few, and obviously you're a D1 school, you can do whatever you want, but like you have a few tablets with
Yeah.
the workout. You go and you press your tablet, and then you go and keep doing your thing. But
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine. I don't know what I would do if I had kids with phones as part of their practice. Yeah, that's a great idea with the phone box. I would be supremely stressed out for
Yeah.
that.
It was hard at first because I'm like, well, they do have to be on the team builder
Hmm.
app to see what they're
Yeah.
doing for the day, but we can really solve this by just taking it one exercise at a time and
Hmm.
just focusing on that exercise and however many sets and reps you have. And there's a rest timer on the team builder app that they were
Oh yeah.
using. And while they were looking at the rest timer counting down, they were checking Snapchat and Instagram. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, this is defeating the purpose of
Yeah.
rest and recovery because now you're just stimulating yourself and your next set of squats is going to be crappy. So
Mm-hmm.
I now I have a TV in my gym and I put a soccer game during every session
Oh,
and
nice.
there's a clock that counts down. So I'm like, just know your rest time, use the clock on the TV to count down and just like guesstimate it. And that's worked really well. But yeah, just the constant notifications coming in. I was like, we need to put an end to this because this is way too much. And I think this is probably inspiring for other strength coaches because a lot of them are using Team
Hmm.
Builder or some sort of app.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to find ways to just get these athletes off their devices because a gym session or a track session, that's like their only time to get away from the phone and really
Oh yeah.
focus in on an activity that they love and they want to get better at. So, yeah, we've tried to implement this and it's been a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah. I even think too about you, like you just said it, like this is the time to get away. And one of the things I like to do is I like to do, like bridge activities, like that involve like either games, like one-on-one games, a lot of physical contact, not like tackling each other, but like, like the push hands game where you're like standing and you try to push the other person over, or you can pull your hands away and they'll fall, or like just like, or you're holding the other person's hand and you're trying to touch their knee and they're trying to tap yours, like stuff that encourages. And I got a lot of this idea originally from Rafe, is like just stuff that gets you in this play-based state where you're forgetting about all the other stuff, and it kind of takes you and trying to get smiles out of kids. And so I like to, I try to transition with that. Hopefully, helpful. But then also one of the things too, I apologize if you can hear my baby's crying upstairs here.
Oh.
She's like, pretty loud. Um, but one thing I did want to say this, because I think this is so important, was this, because this isn't just sports performance. This is sport itself. And I wonder sometimes, like in the same way that people talk a lot about, okay, movies now, nothing is really creative. You're going to have the eighth reboot of Jurassic Park. You're going to have the fifth reboot of Batman, and Star Wars is going to have some other thing going on. That's, it's just everything is a reboot. Music, it's always the same old trap beat that's existed for 20 years and just rap on top of it, just because a lot of it is safety and profit, and it's not driven by creativity anymore. And the same with movies. This was something that I thought was really interesting, was that this I watched this clip, and it was someone saying in the 90s people were masters of lighting. Like there were crews that were so good at the lighting because they didn't have the green screens, that the crews now cannot do what people did back then. The same thing with a lot of stuff with like production. Like I remember watching the guy who produced Michael Jackson's Thriller, and how they came up with the sound. It was so good. And it's just like I like watching like Prince and Michael Jackson's process. And I wonder sometimes, will we get another Prince or Michael Jackson? Is it physically possible to get an artist like that today with how kids are raised and how we come up? And then to parallel that into sport, will we ever get another? And I apologize because my only reference is male athletes here, but like Pistol Pete Maravich, like that kid grew up, so NCAA scoring leader, one of the most legendary like playmakers, ball handlers. He like grew up with a basketball in his hand, took it literally everywhere. He took it to the movies, dribbling it like everywhere he went. That thing was glued to him. And same thing with like Diego Maradona, like many people in the soccer world know. That guy grew up with a soccer ball, basically. And is it possible to get that type of thing? And that's what leads to the creativity. You get the mastery with, like you said, object manipulation. You're growing up with an object. You're learning to manipulate. Don't have other things to distract you. This is your thing, and then that is going to drive creativity and further mastery. And I wonder if kids can. Sometimes I wonder if in the same way will we get another Michael Jackson or Prince or whoever. I don't know. Will we get another, like someone who has that game changing creativity in the same way some of those guys did? It's an interesting thought, I will see modern athletes. Like the main sport I do watch when I watch is like basketball. I like watching like a Jokic, like Nikola Jokic and all his passes and stuff. I think it's just so cool. Like some of these guys are amazing, but at the same time, I don't know if there's anybody who really changed the creative like handling of an object the way those guys did. And it's interesting to think if that's possible, but then you think, okay, if your kid's not allowed to be bored, will they ever take the time to find that thing? And that's, I think, an important question to ask.
As you were talking there, I was thinking about how, like, now young athletes are seeing all these drills on social media and they're being told the answer or told how to manipulate their soccer ball and dribble through cones. But when we didn't have that back in the 90s, we were creating our own drills
Yeah.
and we were doing 1v1s against the tree in the backyard or against dad and a different type of opponent. And yeah, I just really wonder like what the impact of this just blasting of drills and just rehearse stuff on this robotic stuff on social media is going to do for athletes 10 years from now. And I love that you mentioned Maradona. You know soccer well, but when you think of creativity, he's probably one of the first soccer players that comes to mind. And yeah, like the stuff he could do in the game, you're just like, wow, I didn't think that could have gotten any crazier. Or how did he get out of that triple team and twirl around and do this? And it's like, well, the guy was creating his own drills and working with the ball every day. And he wasn't going on social media where someone's like, oh, here are 5 soccer drills you can do to beat defenders.
Yeah, and it is interesting because I think that those videos can help if you've been deprived or don't have ideas, it can help bring you up. But then again, it kind of almost is a ceiling because you're not going to break past that plateau unless you had that just early, that stillness, that obsession, that, object manipulation. That's really where it all starts in so many ways.
Well, is there anything else you would like to add on this topic, or do you think we touched on everything? We definitely discussed a lot.
Yeah. Well, well, there's that. And then I also think with the phones and what else to do, I'm a really big fan of just parents taking time to also play with kids in the sense that, we have like, okay, what replaces screen time? Well, yes, go outside, but then also, and again, you want kids to have their own parent free time. That's very important. I saw actually, Steve Magnus again, he had said that, parent free time is essential for kids. A lot of kids are getting that, boys, especially through like Fortnite, like that. And I do see that a lot in the neighborhood. Instead of boys playing outside, messing around, wrestling each other, whatever, like that Fortnite is now their parent free time. And so I just think that, one of the most important things for skill development period, especially in an early window. So before like age 8 or 10 is parents playing with their kids, because in that play, there can be a lot more fostering of creativity if you allow those options. Especially I guess there's 2 ways of playing, right? Like, and this happens more in legacy sports, and I'm starting to see this more. My 6-year-old son did a year of baseball, and I was like, whoa! Like, you want to talk about drills and overly constrained and way too much coaching. I think your husband's a big baseball guy. I'm sure he knows. Like
Yes,
it's
we always have this discussion, and I think baseball is the greatest disaster in youth sports.
Yeah, after one, I tell you, my first practice with my 6-year-old son, he had just turned 6. And actually, no, he was still 5, maybe like almost 6. And I'm at this practice and they're warming up with like lines and lectures and stretching and then like overcoaching the heck out of every kid's grip on the bat and just like, and then a bunch of kids picking their nose, climbing the fence because it's so boring. And I whip out of course I'm on my phone, but I'm like, All right, I text Jeremy Frisch, and I'm like, I'm like, he's my guy with all the things youth sports, and I'm like, Jeremy, this sucks. Like, he's like, yeah, I didn't put my kids in organized baseball till like 8 or 9 because of that reason. He's like, the parents are way too stressed out, the coaches are way too stressed out, and then Kevin Mulcahy, who's a good he's a strength coach and a sport coach from Ireland, and sees a lot of lines integrating. He says, and this is culturally, whatever the legacy sport is, and especially with the males, like if baseball, football, or if you're in Ireland and it's hurling and all, that's the good old boys sport. That's the sport that the parents, the men especially, find their validation in, and it does something to close. It just does something that is generally pretty negative. So, yeah, just all to be said is, especially that baseball practice, like just for example, like if I just take my son out, and Jeremy talked about this, he's like, we just go play home run. Like, I just throw balls to my kid. Here's the line. See how many home runs you can hit. No coaching. just go do it and see how many. And then by the time that kid was older, 11, he's one of the best hitters on the team just because he was allowed to find his technique. Someone wasn't overcoaching him. It was all just how far can you hit? Because a lot of times too, a lot of, not to get in the nuances, but coaches will tell kids things so they look like adult hitters, but they're not ready for it yet. And, stuff like that. And so it's like, it just allows children to have the joy as the first place. Like, and that is the first thing that's in line is find the joy of this. And early on, before it gets like, middle school and awkward years and your kids might not like hanging out with you as much. Those early years, they're always asking to play, always. And so that's joyful to them. And also too, like when we go over to like my in-laws house, my wife's dad will throw balls to my son. Like, so it's like a family thing. Everyone's doing it, but it's not like sitting there, coaches and like breathing down your neck about whatever. I mean, I saw kids cry at this 6-year-old baseball thing. It's just insane. It's insanity. So, and that's where Athletic Development Games and Jeremy Frisch, like they have a lot of really great games to play with your kids. And I tell you, you start doing it, your kids can learn skills better in many cases because you could just leave it more open-ended and make it more joyful. You can use your imagination. And that's a base that they can creatively build on. And so I just think taking the time to replace, and that's the thing actually I don't, not to criticize at all or any, parent groups, but that is the thing I see the least of is parents playing with kids. That's the most rare thing that I really see. And I'm like, man, I mean, I occasionally do, but it does not happen often. And I would wonder, if this was 50 years ago, if that'd be the same thing. Because kids just love that. They really, like my daughter always comes up like probably twice a week. Daddy, will you play with me? And she loves this game called Steamroller, where I'm lying on the ground and I roll like a log, and then my kids jump over me, and it's exhausting. My abs will get, but like they're learning jumping. And they aren't thinking about learning jumping, and they can go
Yeah.
up on the couch and jump over. And then my 6-year-old son decides to start like stepping on me while he goes over. So I'll like grab him, if he tries to do that, So, but it's like we can come up with all these games to play with our kids where they can actually learn better. There's more joy, and it's going to set them up really well versus like almost like you're outsourcing the coaching for everything. And I think that's a problem too, where everything gets outsourced. And I mean, it might be a different topic, but I guess I just think maybe along the lines of phones, it's similar. Like we're outsourcing attention to phones or another coach versus, yes, free play, but also like taking the time to play with your own child. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think, what you said, the game you played with your daughter, like, she's learning how to jump
Mhm.
without someone giving her all these coaching cues,
Yes.
and I think we really need to recognize that we should give these young ones more credit because they can really self-organize and adapt and learn these skills on their own, and then when we get into high school, yes, we can be more
Yeah.
specific and give them some more detailed pointers, but at these younger ages, it's just something we should stay away from, and we should allow them to explore and solve those different movement problems and really develop that creativity. And just coming back to the baseball thing, you'll find this so funny. So my husband was one of the top recruits in high school, and he went on to pitch at Ole Miss in the SEC. And he threw really hard. And he always tells this story of when he was really young that he would go in the backyard with his grandpa, and his grandpa would say, throw the ball over the fence as hard as you can.
Hmm.
And every rep, he's just like giving it his
Yeah. Yeah.
all. And he always says that has definitely played its role. They didn't have to hire this like mechanics
Yep.
velo pitching coach for $100 an hour at age 6. He
Yep.
really just had to go back there with grandpa and chuck the ball over the fence.
Yeah. There's that. That's such a, that's like that old time wisdom that it's just, that will never not be important. And I mean, I think one of the things too, and, again, it's like what's the minimal knowledge we need to help people be their best. But I think one of the things that we forget is that we look at humans like a machine, like it's just mechanics and drills. And well, if we make this part better, it's going to be better. But it's really all about the performer environment relationship. How do we relate to our environment? Like, and let's start there. Like having, a grandpa just telling you to do something that's just fun, joyful, output driven, not coaching your mechanics. That's it. Like and I think, yeah, similar to Jeremy Frisch and the home run drill and just stuff like that, where, and even like people like Lee Taft will say, hey, velocity comes first, the control can come later. Don't worry about it. I think that's really important too, because we're just in this accelerated culture where we want to see everything done so like quote unquote perfectly right now. It's like, you got time. Like,
Yeah.
the joy is first. And those like, yeah, grandpa throwing for the fences, like, drill, that's first. And then it'll all come around later.
I want to quickly touch on roughhousing because you mentioned the importance of it for boys and being able to get comfortable with contact and building like emotional intelligence, how to regulate their emotions. But I think for our female athletes too, they need that roughhousing because one of the biggest complaints I get from parents is my girl lacks confidence on the field.
Hmm.
She's really hesitant to go into tackles. And I think when that's the case, sometimes they didn't get enough of
Yeah.
that contact and more rough play early on, whether if it was with her siblings or with dad. Not saying it needs to be a full-blown worldwide wrestling match or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
but these girls need to get comfortable with getting in there, pushing with their shoulders and
Hmm.
like grappling a little bit. I think it's so important for our female athletes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the big thing is finding a place where they feel like safe to like let themselves unleash. And I
Yeah.
think for my daughter, that's, playing with me is she'll do, she'll do all the moves and try to wrestle and pull me down or whatever. And then it's interesting to see how, okay, if this is a game and there's a little more fear, how do you then bridge that gap, right? And like that's where I'm actually going to try to put her in. I don't know if she'll stick with it, but like just like a fall wrestling, like because wrestling for girls is more popular. I'm just curious how she'll do with it. We did jujitsu, and I actually wasn't impressed because it was a very drill based coaching, and my kids forgot everything instantly. And there's more play based jujitsus and stuff like that. But although she did remember how to put me in an arm bar, which is funny. But yeah, I think that is if I've learned anything, it's like how a child operates in day to day relationships in life is directly related to what you tend to see on the field. Like I can see that with my daughter, and really physicality, we live life through our bodies. So some form of embodied experience that does involve like some level of controlled aggressiveness is important to embody just general ability to basically assert yourself in life. Like I tend to see that. And then on the field, it really, because I definitely, when I was at Cal, I'll just share this story quickly. When I was at Cal women's swim, we did roughhousing to start some of our warm ups sometime in the weight room, but different girls were just at totally different places. And I think part of it was just, I mean, some of these girls were just like, I don't want to say like their mentality, like they were killers. Like they're just gonna go all out in the water. They're gonna give everything they got. They're competitors. And then some girls are just very timid. And so I had levels of roughhousing. Like I said, on one level, you can just like play like the push hands game where you're just standing, you're just trying to like push the other person with, hands is the only contact. And then I had like in the middle level was like we had a medicine ball and you had to wrestle the other person for it. Like, like you both are bear hugging the ball. That was the middle level. And then the high level was like you're trying to like I set up like these they had these punching bags at Cal and I flipped them on their side. So you stood on it like, Robin Hood and Little John and the log. And and so then you try to push the other person off the log and stuff like that. So that's the most intense. And you got to choose. And it was just funny because I would say 2/3 of the girls were on the bottom third of the intensity, but a third of the girls, ooh, they wanted to get after it. It's just so funny because they were driven to like really get into the roughhousing. So I just think it's good to give somebody that level of the thing that they do, want to embody that. So yeah, I agree. And I've heard that sometimes it's the girls who haven't had that, like it'll be introduced to like ninth grade gymnastics and they just are going crazy with that stuff. Like, so it's always that fire is in there. So always, yeah, finding that outlet I think is really important.
I'm glad you shared that story with your college girls because it's beneficial for female athletes of all ages, whether you're a young one or a high level Division I athlete.
Hmm.
I think it's just so beneficial for really building competitors and
Yes.
warriors. And like you said, like these girls, like they just don't want to hold back anymore. They want to get in there and compete, which I think is incredible. So I remember playing a game in high school with my soccer coach called Anything Goes. And
Mhm.
it was basically tackle football on the full soccer field.
Whoa.
And we divided into underclassmen versus upperclassmen. And when we played it, I was a freshman and there were no rules. Like anything goes. You could pull hair. You could like just drag someone across the grass. Like it was crazy. And I remember going at it as a freshman with this senior who was a starter. And I'm like, I don't care. Like I'm going to get her. And we were like pulling hair. Like it was crazy. And people of today would be like, wow, that's like harassment. That's just not good. And I'm like, well, it kind of really encouraged us to compete and no hard feelings after we were done. I
Hmm.
shook hands with her. We're still teammates. We made each other better that day.
Yeah. I love that's so awesome. I've never heard of that, but that reminds me of
It was so
like
fun.
Jeremy Frisch talked about playing tackle basketball growing up, like which is basically that, but I've actually seen like this wrestling basketball. It's like an official thing. I think it's more wrestlers doing it to give them something to wrestle each other over, but I'd never heard of that with female athletes, but I can only imagine too being the coach how much you're going to learn about all your athletes with that's on the table, like you said, who's the warrior? I think, yeah, warrior is probably a better term than I was just that I was like, you're a killer. I kind of like to think, but yeah, warrior is a better term. But like, who's a warrior? Who has that fire inside of them, and then how do they deal with somebody else when someone else is really physically imposing themselves? In that way, I'm sure you learn. It's probably entertaining for the coach, and
Oh,
it's
he
kind of one of
loved
those
it.
things. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
bet. Yeah. I'm actually already starting to get. I mean, coaching track. I don't know if I could really pull that one out, but I'm gonna start to get this. I don't know.
Well, it's
I'll
hard
start to get some
now
ideas.
today in 2025 for
Yeah.
sure. You
Yeah.
might get
Anything
fired
goes,
from your
100-meter
job.
dash. Yeah. You go and then you can like hit the person next to you or something or hold them
Yeah.
back.
Well, I will say my high school soccer team, we were beasts. We were state championships multiple years in a row. We were one of the best teams in the county. And yeah, we just had a team of competitors and our coach was really big on being aggressive, being the fittest we could
Mhm.
be. And it really showed in our records and just who our team became to be. So yeah, I look back on that and I remember that being like one of the highlights of high school soccer. But I guess let's wrap this up and just kind of coming back to the phone usage.
Mhm.
What are your predictions with where this is going? Are we going to kind of divide into two different societies where you
Mhm.
have
Yeah.
your minimalists and non-phone users or people who are kind of following this AI technology crowd? Is it going to end well? Are we screwed? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm a little more pessimistic, but maybe you can give us some hope.
I don't know. I mean, that's honestly been a source of a little bit of like existential angst for me in the sense of like you see this direction that we're going, and on the one I was just reading somebody. I used to work at Cal, and someone from Berkeley was like, "My students are unusually brilliant this year, but then they did really bad on their test. Basically, they were using Chat GPT for the assignments, and then didn't know how to program. And this is at like Cal, like one of the best schools in the nation, and it's just again, it's a comfort thing because if we can select the comfort piece, and it's almost like how do you in the scope of a capitalist society, you almost have to monetize withdrawal from electronics. It's almost like it's almost you have to pay to take yourself out of that. But I don't know. I think a lot of it depends on, it's all interconnected. And hopefully we can, there's a lot of good podcasts on basically what we would call like war games isn't the term, but basically like the factors that determine the race to AI and all this stuff. And you would just hope that I think a lot of it's going to be based on economics and the world around us in that sense. But I think no matter what happens, as long as we can do what we can, and I think that's just always thing I always have to come back to is how can I do what I can to make this the best experience for my children and then ultimately myself as well. And I'm reminded of that every day. Like, if I don't get outside and do something physically active, in my morning, my work on the computer deteriorates later in the afternoon, stuff like that, just so regardless of what happens, just trying to find that place where your home base is those human level, the things that make us innately human, that we're wired to be creative and intuitive with. And if we have that home base, everything that happens outside of it, I do believe will be better, be it dealing with technology and how do we actually work with AI moving forward, or how do I get better at my sport and how do I be creative and adaptable in my sport and with other people. So I think as long as we can make that our home base, that's the best we can do. And I think the more people who take that on, ultimately, I think that can hopefully start, you say revolution, but at least some sort of change in the minds and the way that we see things. And I think that's where sport can have a lot of really good lessons.
Awesome. Well, Joel, this was really fun. And I think everyone will find this discussion super fascinating and maybe start to question what they're doing or implement some new things with their kids. So thank you again. And I will see everyone next time.